I'd like to welcome everyone to one of our outspoken webinars. I'm Father Jim Martin. I am a Jesuit priest and editor of Outreach.Faith, the LGBTQ Catholic resource. We generally try to start on time, even though generally speaking, a lot of our participants will be trickling in. We're very happy to have Dr. Ish Ruiz with us tonight. And I'm going to introduce Ish. And then I'm going to introduce my colleague, Ryan DeCorpo, who is managing editor of Outreach. Dr. Ish Ruiz is a postdoctoral fellow of Catholic Studies at Emory University's Candler School of Theology and holds a PhD in Theology and Ethics from the Graduate Theological Union. His research interests explore the intersection between queer theology, ecclesiology, sexual ethics, and Catholic education. Prior to his appointment at Emory, Dr. Ruiz taught at the secondary school level for 11 years, chaired the Marianist LGBTQ+ initiative team, offered several workshops to Catholic schools on Catholic LGBTQ+ inclusion, and presented in several pastoral conferences throughout the nation on Catholic LGBTQ+ inclusion. Through his teaching, research, and service, Dr. Ruiz hopes to see a world where Catholicism and LGBTQ people embrace each other with love and gratitude for the gifts everyone brings to the society and the church. Welcome, Ish. I'm going to call you Ish. You can call me Jim, if that's okay. Great to have you here. Ish also published today on Outreach with Jane Bleasdale, an incredible article, really well done, talking about his research, which I'm sure he'll talk about tonight, about LGBTQ Catholic educators and calls for a ceasefire, as he says, in the removal by dioceses and bishops and priests of LGBTQ educators. We'll ask him those questions later on. Also, I want to introduce Ryan DeCorpo. Ryan DeCorpo is the managing editor of Outreach. Little preview, he will be assuming a full-time job starting May 1st as managing editor of Outreach after he graduates with his master's degree from the journalism school at Northeastern University. Prior to that, he was an O'Hare Fellow at American Media, which is a year-long internship. And prior to that, he graduated from Fordham University. So Ryan and I will be engaging Ish in the conversation tonight. So welcome, Ryan.
Thank you, Jim.
Great to have you. Now, Ish, there's so much that we could talk about, and we had a little bit of a conversation before kind of planning this, and I told Ish that if he wants to sort of take it in a different direction, given that he knows this topic better than Ryan and I do, that he should feel free. The first thing I want to talk about, I think that the question on everybody's mind is really, and I'm sure this is a little too general, but if people are interested in doing outreach in Catholic secondary education, what are some best practices that you can suggest to people?
Thank you very much. Thank you for the introduction and for being here and being interested in this conversation. Yeah, like the intro said, my experience working in Catholic high schools, right, has been both in the lived experience of actually ministering to LGBTQ+ students and the experience of being able to go to different schools, right? And as far as best practices go, the greatest, it's really hard to pin down a practice that would work well, like blanket, but here are some general ideas that I came up with as I was, reflecting on this work. The first thing is to see this ministry as a space. Sometimes when we look at ministry, we get bogged down in the nitty-gritty, in the what about church teaching, what about the bishop, what about the parents, what about this and that. At the end of the day, what does it mean to build a space where LGBTQ+ persons can grow in their faith, build relationships with each other, with you, with God, etc. And so one of the things that I've realized pretty much across the board is that space looks very different, right? So when I think about LGBTQ+ ministry, and for some people, the LGBTQ+ ministry means one accepting counselor in their office. For some people, it means a GSA club that meets regularly. For others, it means that we're going to have lunch once a month. But what does it mean to hold that space? Now, that's like the generic idea. Some other best practices that I like to throw out are be proactive. Don't expect LGBTQ plus students to, a situation to blow up for you to really start thinking about this. Number two is lean into your school's Catholic mission and your charism. So really think about what your theology and how does our Catholic identity as a school make us or compel us even to welcome LGBTQ plus persons. And then the third thing is just be ready to make mistakes. You're going to make a billion mistakes. I've learned a lot. Build relationship with your administrators. If you're an administrator, build relationship with your teachers of trust, and really start navigating this risky ministry. It's a ministry that does have some risk. It does, but at the same time, it is a very joyful ministry, and it is very life-giving.
Yes, as Jim mentioned, today you and Jane Bleasdale, who is an assistant professor in the School of Education at the University of San Francisco, published an article about LGBTQ educators in Catholic schools and many of the challenges that they face. As you know, many times LGBTQ educators have to hide their sexuality from the archdiocese and from school administration so as not to lose their jobs. And in the article, I just want to read one brief section. You write, "Our research suggests that LGBTQ educators, including those who conscientiously dissent from magisterial doctrine, can offer unique and indispensable blessings to the mission of Catholic schools." Can you talk a bit about what these unique and indispensable blessings that LGBTQ people can offer are, and what message does firing them send to students and the broader community?
Right, yeah, thank you. Now, in academic circles, we talk about a concept called queer privileged epistemology, right? This is those are fancy words. In day-to-day language, I would say LGBTQ plus persons have a particular way of seeing the world, right? Of knowing, of learning. And when you have an LGBTQ plus educator, that LGBTQ plus educator, because of their position as a queer person in a Catholic institution, has a particular vantage point, a way of looking at the community, a way of looking at the students, a way of even thinking and identifying with the students, right? And that's basically the argument I'm employing here, is to say, obviously, like when we interviewed, when we surveyed teachers, and even some of the other studies that have interviewed teachers, you see that present. LGBTQ plus educators have a particular sense of how to go toward the margin, have a particular way of understanding what it is like to be Catholic and exercise a vocation, even under risk and under threat. And that generates a particular level of commitment. Particular to LGBTQ plus students, LGBTQ plus educators can serve as role models, right? In the same way that you look at a Black student, a Latinx student, and say that young person can benefit from seeing adult Black and Latinx role models. In the same way, LGBTQ plus students really rely on LGBTQ plus role models. If you think about it, being a young queer person is very unique. Probabilities are that your parents are not LGBTQ. B, probabilities are that you become aware of your identity later in life. It's new, versus the person of color who realizes that they're a person of color when they get discriminated against in the playground when they're 2, right? No, obviously there are always some exceptions, right? And 3, LGBTQ plus persons have the ability to hide, to be in the closet. And so navigating those 3 things, coming to terms with the identity, not knowing what an adult LGBTQ plus relationship looks like because you don't have your parents, and C, learning how to out yourself, be authentic. An LGBTQ plus adult has a unique vantage point on those experiences, right? And then the last thing is this. Young people are leaving the church right, left, and center. And young people, even straight ones, who love LGBTQ plus persons because they have friends, cousins, uncles, often cite problematic, there are problems with LGBTQ plus exclusion in the church as the reason why they leave. And there are several studies that have also showcased that. I think young people could benefit from the witness of an LGBTQ plus adult who has every reason to leave our church, but chooses to stay. Apathetic teenagers, or those that are on the fence, I argue, are more likely to hear from an adult who should also be on the fence. That might be like, if a queer adult can explain, here's why I stay in Catholic education, I argue that can create a significant impact in young persons, right? And those are the unique and indispensable blessings that I think LGBTQ plus educators can bring to education.
That's a really great point. One of the things that I often observe is that when LGBTQ educators are fired, they're almost always described as the most beloved, the most dedicated, the most this. And for a long time, I thought, well, that must be all PR, and that's probably something that the media is kind of making up. But to your point, you realize why they are so dedicated and faithful. It's because they have to really want to be there. And I think that's a great point, that they show students who might be on the edge, what it means to stay if you're on the margins. Let me ask you a tough question. We talked about this as maybe one for the end, but I really want to give you time to answer it. And it is, you've talked about some best practices. You've talked about the value of LGBTQ educators. Shifting to difficulties in schools, what advice do you have for people, for teachers, for faculty, for administration that want to do more LGBTQ welcome or inclusion, even have like a pride or an LGBTQ club or something, but are facing opposition from either principal, the pastor, or more likely the bishop or the diocese? Those are tough questions, but I'm just curious what you found helpful and what kind of advice you would give to people who are sort of facing those kind of ecclesial problems.
Yeah. Similar to how you often say care for LGBTQ plus persons also requires care for their families, right? Often at times I find myself, when I do this work, offering some sort of pastoral care to precisely people who engage in the ministry, teachers whose heads are on the chopping block because they want to have an LGBTQ plus group in their schools. So a lot of because you framed the question in terms of advice, I want to really make sure that my response pays attention and takes care of LGBTQ plus persons by saying, sorry, not LGBTQ plus persons, to those who minister to LGBTQ plus youth in schools, by saying that, the popular phrase, right, Rome wasn't built in a day. This is going to be a journey, a process, that we will probably, this ministry is indeed an embattled ministry. It is not a ministry that is openly welcome at all places, and there are always going to be risks, or hopefully not always, but at the very least, right now there are risks, right? And so definitely see this as a process. I like to use the analogy of a massage, like a masseuse, right? I don't know if anybody's if y'all have ever had a massage, but like when someone's working on your back and they find a knot, they tend to pause and stay there and work on that knot before proceeding. You can't just like plow through, right? And so a lot of times it is about identifying where is that point of resistance? Where does the conversation actually stop? Do we need to talk to our administrators? Do we need to talk to our fellow teachers? Do we need to talk to parents? In many cases, and that's been honestly my experience, a lot of the school community itself is on board. It's the archbishop, the diocese, and so it's about that. It's finding the knot and then putting some gentle pressure there. How do we do that? How do we move this, right? Often people resort to their charism. Now, of course, this only applies to schools that have a particular religious order or a particular philosophy for Catholic education, which we can talk about. But the charism of a school, remember when we say Catholic and Catholic values, that means so much, right? The church is so big and has so many perspectives. But the truth is that the church is very diverse in how it lives out its Catholic faith. So sometimes articulated statements of mission and charism that explain to us how we're going to live our faith are the avenue to assert that gentle pressure and say, well, this is how For example, my Jesuit school, my Lasallian school, my Marianist school lives out its Catholicism, which is why it's important for us to make space for LGBTQ plus ministry. And then the third thing is what I said at the beginning is see this ministry as a space. Often we are locked into the GSA club, right? But broaden your way of thinking to it being a space. A person can be a space. My classroom can be a space. I remember there was a year where we were not allowed to have an LGBT group in my school, in my high school where I used to teach at. So I went to the principal and I said, if a student wants to talk to me about LGBTQ plus things, am I supposed to not talk to them? Am I supposed to kick them out? No, you can talk to the students about whatever you want. They just won't have official recognition. They just will not have, obviously, which I know means I'm not getting paid a moderator stipend. We don't get a budget. But then we, but I told the students, hey, let's have a conversation. Let's have a conversation next week. Bring anybody that you want. Then suddenly 30 students show up. And then we realized that if each of the 30 students brought $3, we basically reach our budget that we would have otherwise had. So stuff like that. And like, how can we, and in that moment, I became a space, right? For the club. And this group met underground. They even created, I like to tell this story, they created a fake name. They were to advertise that we were meeting. And it was called the Geography Club, which is actually an acronym: gay, eccentric, odd, gay, radical, asexual, homosexual, asexual, pansexual, homosexual youth. Geography. And they had this flyer and they sent it out, and that's how the students got to my room. And we had actually more LGBTQ plus students than we did a year later when we had official recognition from the school. So that was a way of ministry. And it involved a sacrifice. Yeah, I didn't have the recognition and the pay and all that, but it was ministry. And so that's how I did it. So those are my two pieces of advice is find where the tension is and find ways of exerting gentle pressure, and B, see the ministry as the creation of a space. And remember that you can create a space in many ways, not necessarily with like a stamp. Now, obviously, yeah, we moved toward the stamp eventually because we want institutional recognitions. We're as Cathological, or we're moving toward this vision of kingdom, but it is a journey and a process, and we have to start here, right?
No. That's extremely helpful. I'm going to ask a follow-up question, if you don't mind. Also, I want to let people know that if you have any questions for Dr. Ruiz, put them in the chat, and we'll have some time later for Q&A from questions directly from our participants. Ish, I really liked what you said about relying on the charism, because, of course, if you're a Mercy school or a LaSallian school, there's kind of something added. For example, a lot of these founders often, I find, went to people on the margins. And so we are following the example of, Catherine McCauley or whomever. Well, but let me ask you, when in your experience, when schools have, our diocesan schools, which are so many schools, have had to deal with the bishop, and have the diocesan charism, as it were, what kinds of things have you found have been helpful for the bishop or the archbishop or the diocesan representative? What kinds of things can help persuade them, or at least help open their eyes a bit? What have you found most helpful?
Yeah, and another way of looking at this question is, how can a school administrator really talk about the Catholic faith without the tool of the charism, right? To support, right? So, now this becomes like a theological question and a question of Catholic school philosophy. What are Catholic schools for, etc. And honestly, there's a lot of philosophies. I like to highlight two of them that are opposing. One of them I call the distinguishability approach. The idea here is, this is the approach that a lot of bishops who are or school leaders who have a problem with LGBTQ plus ministry would adopt. The distinguishability approach. The idea here is the Catholic Church exists. Catholic schools are meant to, in a way, raise Catholic young people, bring them about in the church, and bring these young people in accordance with church teaching, with church doctrine. There's this idea that we have to preserve these teachings of the church, which are what makes us countercultural. This is where the distinguishability comes from, right? We are separate from society. We are a school that is distinctively Catholic. if as a school, we were to invite in all these secular ideologies, LGBTQ plus identity being of course at the forefront of public discourse, of culture, right? Then we are somehow diluting or harming the Catholic mission of our school. For this reason, we cannot have LGBTQ plus educators. See, they give witness to a contrary to the church's teaching. We cannot have a club that seemingly condones an identity that would run afoul of Catholic teaching. We cannot do those things. That's a distinguishability approach. And under that approach, you have these strict rules like no uniform, no bathrooms for trans students, gender neutral bathrooms, no same-sex couples at prom, etc. Right? And I have a problem with that approach. It seems a lot like the smaller, purer church approach. It seems a lot like let's separate ourselves from society. But also pragmatically, if we're trying to raise Catholics, what are we expecting to sanitize? My friend David Palmieri brought this argument up to me. Do you expect to sanitize the students and provide them some sort of Catholic bubble for the rest of their lives? No, students are going to go out into the world and have to really deal with the messiness. I use the word sanitize. You cannot really sanitize the Catholic school and assume that there's not going to be any sort of diversity or tension so the students can just somehow not be led astray. So I vouch for the second approach, which I use the word Catholicity, the Catholicity approach. Now I'm not using the word Catholic as in the Catholic, but rather the word Catholic, smaller C Catholic, which means universal, welcoming anybody, kathoholos, welcoming of all, right? And so under that approach, the Catholic school exists to bring up students in the Catholic tradition, but it's not measured by how well necessarily they adhere to particular church teachings, but rather the relationships that we form. Can the students become that good Samaritan? Can the students live out those beatitudes? So now we're looking not so much at a rubric of church teaching to evaluate the students, but rather in the school community, right? But rather at a relational approach. Is the gospel alive here? And the truth is that living the gospel requires us to engage with diverse perspectives in a messy world with a lot of uncertainty. See, that's the Catholic school environment that I think administrators should be creating, should vouch for. It's the one that is, I think, closer to the gospels, considering how in many of your stories, the stories that you highlight in Building a Bridge, Jesus often goes to the peripheries. But B, and most importantly, it's the realistic approach. Our students are going to encounter LGBTQ plus persons, and they don't have to leave the Catholic schools. They're on their phone. They can go online and watch a YouTube video of someone coming out. So they already have access to the diverse perspectives, and simply pretending like the perspectives don't exist or not allowing them to have a voice or enter into conversation in a Catholic school is doing a great disservice to the Catholic formation of our kids. So with that in mind, I suggest that administrators really take a realistic picture to bishops who can use it, right? Because bishops, right, they often don't know the school culture. It's important for administrators to say, hey, listen, we have a lot of LGBTQ plus students. Our students are constantly asking questions about LGBTQ plus inclusion. We need these spaces where the students can discuss, explore, understand identity and sexuality more. And so learning how to frame that approach theologically and philosophically is the key role of an administrator, right? A lot of administrators are brought up theologically, but a lot are not. And so mastering really that theology of Catholic education, like, hey, we exist here to form our students in light of the real world, is a key part of it. And then the last part, which a lot of people criticize me for bringing up, but it's true, is that church doctrine on sexuality the ground is shifting here. It is incredibly contested. The bishops in Germany are calling for reform. The bishops in Belgium, they published a ritual for blessing same-sex couples. Bishop McElroy, Bishop Stowe here have advocated for LGBTQ plus inclusion in the church, radical inclusion even. The ground is shifting on this. So do we really want to die on this hill, and exclude LGBTQ plus persons? I argue that the more prudent thing to do is to be cognizant of the need for more dialogue rather than less dialogue.
Ish, in Jesuit spirituality, you often hear about the need to be in the world, but not of it. And I think, as you pointed out, that oftentimes Catholic schools are trying to keep aspects of the world out of the classroom. And how does an educator or just a teacher that maybe is an administrator, doesn't have a connection with the bishop, counter that and help to bring some of that reality that the students will face outside of the classroom into their everyday lives?
Well, one of the things is that the schools already do it, right? They hire the Jewish math teacher and the atheistic English teacher. We do it all the time. They hire people of all sorts of racial backgrounds. Not only that, they admit students of all sorts of religious and diverse backgrounds, right? But including religious, right? So we already do it. So why is the LGBTQ plus one the threatening one? I think Bishop Cardinal McElroy kind of questioned this in the America article. It's like, it is a mystery. I think he called it a demonic mystery or something like that. Why we demonize so much LGBTQ plus persons. It is baffling that, considering all the diversity that we already have to engage with, that this one somehow becomes, the particular one that's problematic, right? And so that's how I would say, the other piece I like to bring up to administrators, and even I've had the opportunity to talk to bishops about this, is Catholic school is supposed to impart Catholic doctrine and Catholic teaching to its students. Absolutely. That's not the question here, though. Then the question is not whether we're doing that or not. The question is, what do you want the students to do with the Catholic tradition that is being imparted onto them? Do you want the students to blindly follow it as if they were robots and Catholic doctrine was some sort of code that they were supposed to function about? We're not. We're conscientious beings. We enter into dialogue and relationships. If you want the students to engage in dialogue and in relationship with the Catholic Church and its doctrines, then you must invite in multiple diverse voices to produce a dialogue and produce that sense of diversity and that nuance that really exists in our church. Recently, you posted a little bit about this, and it was briefly in the article. Jim, you posted about this recently, and it was in the article that I published today, that y'all published today with James Bleasdale. Pope Francis met with this group of young people, and they had a conversation. The conversation was in Spanish, but there are subtitles. It's on Hulu. Pope Francis answers. Amén, el Papa responde. And I was very struck by that. I'm still processing it because, it was truly a dialogue and people disagreed. But I think that at the end, I hope that at the end, the young folks, the young Catholics that met with the Pope, they talked about everything: race, abortion, sex work, trans identities, racism. At the end of the day, I hope that because of the dialogue and the space, that those young folks formed a deeper connection with the church rather than a weaker one.
Well, Ish, I encourage everybody to look at that video, and it does have subtitles. I think in English it's "The Pope Responds," and it is he's one of the things Ish is referring to is he answers a question from a non-binary person who talks about their place in the church, and the Pope gives this wonderful answer and says no one can be excluded. Ish, you have so much experience to share with us. I want to sort of take us out a little broader, and something that I think a lot of people might be interested in are, in your experience, obviously you can't speak for every LGBTQ student. We've talked about the responsibility of the educators towards the students, right? What, in your experience, what are LGBTQ kids today, say in high schools, looking for from their schools? What do you think they're looking for, and what do they want? What do they need?
What a great question. There's a pessimistic part one to this response, right? Which is that there are some alarming statistics here: anxiety, depression, and suicide that plague LGBTQ plus youth at a disproportionate rate compared to their heterosexual cisgender counterparts. And so that alone speaks to a great need on behalf of our students. The house is on fire. We need to put out this fire. This has become, and I've said it at outreach and I will say it again, this is a pro-life issue. These students' lives are on the line. So that's the first thing is they're looking to put out some fires. When a child reaches out to you, and many reached out to me with suicidal ideations, with depression and with anxiety, they're not causing drama, they're asking for help. And so recognizing that is number one. They're looking for help. They're looking for comfort, that they are, you know what, I'm going to use theological language, loved by God, made in God's image, have dignity, are worthy of love, are worthy of happiness, will be okay, will flourish, right? In their words, you know, that they're loved, that they're cared for, that they matter, that they're seen, right? So that's part one. Part two actually is the more optimistic and pessimistic, the more optimistic and joy-filled part of this ministry, which is the flourishing part. When you create a space for LGBTQ plus persons to be there, you will see flourishing. In secular terms, you'll see excellence. You'll see, right? We talk about Black excellence, Latinx, you'll see queer excellence, LGBTQ plus people just being wonderful. And to me, that has been, bar none, the most transformative and touching part of my vocation and my career, is seeing my young LGBTQ plus students flourish. Another piece of media that also came out recently, I think early April, is on YouTube, and it's called Sharing Space. And it's not a Catholic thing, but it basically could be. And it's Daniel Radcliffe, who plays Harry Potter, opening up a space for trans teens. And just hearing them talk, it's no wonder people want to shut them up, because they are a powerful force. When you see a person, especially a young person who really knows their identity and has gone through the process of finding themselves and being okay with them, loving themselves as a person, in my words, being in the image of God, and their words as a person worthy of love and respect, there's a power there and a beauty there. There was a term that I learned when I watched that, and that's called gender euphoria. We often talk about gender dysphoria, right? This suffering that transgender persons go through. But we don't always talk about where they should be, which is the euphoric part, the gender euphoria. And when I got that word, something clicked in my head, because I was like, that's what I've been seeing in my students: euphoria, joy. And my last year teaching high school, we did an event where I asked my students what was their queer superpower. And a lot of them talked about resilience, patience, forgiveness, a lot of things you talked about in your book, Jim, about the gifts that LGBTQ plus people bring to the church, right? I saw those in my students. Joy. They even talked about love, a type of love that exists and thrives in the face of oppression and silencing. So what do they need? I think they need that space so that they can thrive, so that euphoria can just take root. You can really extinguish a young person's life and their hopes and their dreams when you oppress them. So
it's just been a lot of focus in recent months on transgender students in Catholic schools, and that was mainly spurred by a long list of directives from dioceses, from U.S. bishops, about how Catholic educators should respond to transgender students and what is their place in Catholic schools. And many of these directives are really quite restrictive, and some of them say pretty blatantly that you cannot express a gender in school that is at odds with your biological sex, that transgender students have to be silent in Catholic schools. How would you counsel both trans students and LGBTQ educators in responding to these pretty restrictive directives?
That's really tough. I've done workshops throughout the nation on transgender inclusion, on LGBT inclusion, right? But toward the last 3 years, it's been transgender inclusion. When it's a co-ed school, it's a little easier. You have some ways of, making room, making space for a student that identifies as a different gender than the one they were assigned at birth. I've been at school, I've worked with co-ed schools where it's an easy transition. Some co-ed schools, not so much. When I work, this issue becomes really poignant and very difficult when it comes to single-sex schools. So, and it's also, I've seen it happen more in all-girls schools. But even then, there's a little bit of wiggle room because, for example, a person assigned female at birth can wear pants and a polo shirt, and that's still, quote unquote, culturally acceptable for a woman to wear, right? So this person who identifies as a trans boy can at least wear the same uniform. And, there are some measures that can help the person really explore and, quote unquote, grow into that identity. Recently, I've been in conversation with 2 schools that are all boys schools. And you can imagine that there's a slightly different cultural consideration when a person assigned male at birth wants to bring a skirt to an all boys school and wear heels, right? And so transgender issues in Catholic schools really rest on how does the school construct its conception of gender and see itself, the identity of the school, right? So for some schools, it's really important to say that we are an all-girls school. There have been trans boys that have graduated from all-girls schools. And of course, there have been also trans girls that have graduated from all-boys schools. And so for administrators, that's where you have to think about, like, what does that mean? The fact that a person can transition in your single-sex school, right? I honestly do not have any, something that I tell any school that I work with is, I am here to give you language, help you think through and help you work through something. But we are inventing a wheel here, and I do not have a tool that is going to fix everything. We are creating the tools, and we're going to make mistakes. Here is a quote that I often cite. This is a Marianist quote that I love and is attributed to Father William Joseph Chaminade, who is the founder of the Marianists. And he said, quote, "I am like a brook that makes no effort to overcome obstacles in its way. All the obstacles can do is hold me up for a while, as a brook is held up. But during that time, it grows broader and deeper. And after a while, it overflows the obstruction and flows along again. That is how I am going to work." And I love that quote because oftentimes we are not able to remove the obstacles that are in our way. We are not able to do anything to change the bishop's response to transgender issues. And side comment, you can read a lot of the theologians' response to that, and I side with those that such measures are just really out of touch with the reality of trans people, right? But we can't change those right now. But what I like about this quote is, again, I go to the space into existing. Can I hold space for a trans person? And little by little, communities do get transformed when we hold space and we listen to and we learn from one another. So that's usually the general approach I take, is how are we going to make a little bit of room for this transgender person? Of course, the danger with these policies is that they prohibit even enrollment of transgender persons into schools, right? And so building that space is harder. But part of me wants to say, sometimes we have a responsibility to not obey. Sometimes we have a responsibility to be more creative, to offer prudential solutions to what we have. With regard to trans people, sometimes kids discover that they're trans when they're already enrolled. You're gonna really, and so what things can administrators and teachers do? I've witnessed administrators and teachers in some ways defy our Jocelyn rules and be creative about it and say, well, we technically don't have a club for LGBTQ+, we have a counseling group, and there are ways always of using the institution and to make that room and make that space. And to the extent possible, we have to do that. David Palmieri, I see his name here, gave a great analogy at the outreach talk last year about a narrow ridge, right? Of people, having to do a balancing act. And that narrow ridge is very real. And unfortunately, there are no solutions that I can give you, but those are my general principles.
Well, that's very helpful.
I have one brief follow-up just before we start with the Q&A here, and it was you had mentioned, and I think this is an important topic, you had mentioned earlier that LGBTQ youth face a tremendous amount of mental health challenges. Sometimes they come to teachers with suicidal ideation. How can educators recognize an LGBTQ student at risk if they don't necessarily go to the teacher and say, I'm having a tough time? What are the signs in the classroom where an educator can recognize a student that may be at risk?
That is a very good question. And I always urge all school administrators to engage the counseling department, who are the experts in mental health at the school, right? To help recognize some of those, right? For the most part, I think two important things, and I keep going back to the space, but the first thing is just the awareness that this is a particular risk that LGBTQ+ students are propense to experience already is half of the battle. When a person is a member of the LGBTQ+ community, a young person, part of my brain is already engaged, being like, how is a student interacting? And so I look for questions of mood. So is a student depressed, sad, angry? Angry is actually good, right? When a student is angry, that's a not that I like them being angry, but it's a good thing that they're expressing, right? Usually questions of suicidal ideation take place when the anger is turned inward and not expressed. So if a student is expressing anger, for me, that's actually a good sign. But I would want that. I would want the student to voice their concern, their frustration. That's where the space comes in. And then the other piece is connection. Is the student connected to community? Does the student have friends? I've been in schools and I've had experiences where some of the students' friends will come up to me and say, hey, this student, and some of the students are smart enough to know that it's more important for you to risk your relationship with your friend and save their life than to keep a secret to maintain a friendship, but a secret that can cost them their life. So training the student body to also do that is very important. Yeah,
it's very helpful. Thank you for that. That's a very pastoral way of approaching it. We have some questions already, and I want to give a chance to weigh in. I'm going to read them. The first question it's a little long. It's from Louis Lensmeyer, and I'll just read it out. Many of the diocesan employment policies across the country do not account for sexual orientation, forcing educators to be in the closet at their job. For example, here are policies from 2 different dioceses, and then he offers policies. It is the policy to ensure employment opportunity without discrimination or harassment on the basis of age, ancestry, color, disability, national origin, place of birth, race, sex, marital status, or association with a member of a legally protected category listed above, insofar as it aligns with the religious teachings of the Catholic Church. Another one, the Office of Human Resources, these are kind of generic policies, provides professional employment and benefit services to those doing the work of the church and the diocese. The department commits to fulfill its mission of employee recruitment, selection, and retention in a Christ-like manner. So the question is, there are these policies already, non-discrimination policies in Catholic schools. And Lewis asks, how can LGBTQ educators in dioceses like these get support?
So my dissertation was on LGBTQ+ educators in Catholic schools, and I'm currently working on a book. I'm publishing the public-facing version of that. I have to actually take a couple of steps back from even this question, all this information. In the US, there exists such a thing as I'm going to answer this question briefly because I feel like it might lead to like a rabbit hole that we might not have enough time for. So maybe this is a conversation for another time. But in the US, there exists a thing as the ministerial exception, which means that state courts, even in states that have non-discrimination protections for LGBTQ+ persons, and even in Catholic institutions, where there are provisions that include sexual orientation in that equal opportunity clause, the Catholic institution can still fire any quote unquote ministerial employee with impunity with regard to questions of diversity. This includes Catholic schools could fire people on the basis of disability, and they have, on the basis of age, and they have, on the basis of race, and they have, on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity, and they have. And if these fired employees were to sue the school, because they're employees of a religious institution, they're considered ministerial employees, and a court of law would not hear that lawsuit. It would dismiss the lawsuit. This is the ministerial exception, and there are two Supreme Court cases, one in 2012 and one in 2019, decisions that protect, the Supreme Court decisions protect the religious institution by giving them basically sole autonomy in appointing its ministerial employees. And even an atheist teacher, because they're employed by the Catholic school, is considered a ministerial employee according to that Supreme Court decision, which is a violation of Catholic theology, which grounds ministry in baptism. But schools have used that, and so the picture is a little bit more grim. There basically is very little to no protection. So I don't think we can resort to a court of law and non-discrimination protections to protect LGBTQ plus persons. I think we need to go to the article like we published today and engage in theological discourse about the presence of LGBTQ plus ministers, the gifts that they offer the Catholic Church, and why we need to retain them, because in a court of law, there are no protections. I also was teaching in San Francisco. We had a unionized school system, and for you to fire a teacher, you have to go through a particular union-sanctioned process, a tenured teacher, and you became tenure after 4 years, a union-sanctioned process. And so I think that's a good protection, but there are only like, 3 or 4 Catholic school systems that are unionized, where the teachers are unionized. And in that case, there's a particular protocol to fire a tenured teacher, and you need to have paperwork and evidence that they're unfit to teach. And it goes in front of in our union, it would go in front of an arbiter who would make a final decision. So yes, the bishop could not unilaterally fire a teacher. And so that's one case, but again, there are only 3 or 4 of those in the whole nation that are unionized. If more Catholic schools were unionized, and they would have some of those protections without having to resort to a court of law. I'll stop there. That's a rabbit hole that we can keep pulling, but yeah.
No, because then we get into kind of legal considerations, but a bit of a follow-up question, and I think you've already answered this a little bit. A person who prefers to remain anonymous says, it seems like the more advocacy there is in society, the more prevalent these ministerial exceptions become. She asked, what can be done to change this trend? Are you suggesting, which it sounds like you are, that the way ahead is not sort of as much legally as trying to sort of conversion of minds and hearts with articles and sort of helping people see it more theologically? Is that a way to combat that trend?
Yeah, well, there are people still fighting it legally, right? There are people who are. There are, one of the Supreme Court justices in a concurring opinion, argued that we need to give religious institutions the benefit of the doubt when they say that an employee is a minister. There's more nuance here, right? So let's suppose I was fired for being a gay teacher. I would sue the school. I'll be in front of a judge, and I'll say, they fired me for being gay. The school would say, he can't sue me because he's a minister, so he can't sue me. In which case, we both have to demonstrate whether or not I am actually a minister. So there have been cases in which the ministerial employee or the fired employee has been deemed not to be a minister. There was a case in which they fired a gay chef. And so the court realized that person's not a minister. Once it's determined that the person is not a minister, then the state and federal non-discrimination policies apply and the person can sue. Okay. But if it's determined that you are a minister by the court, then you cannot, really do anything. You're fired and you cannot do anything about it. Now, the courts have declined to adopt a rigid definition of ministry. They look at it on a case-by-case basis. But the Supreme Court's latest decision involved two teachers, one fired on the basis, and she claimed on the basis of disability, and the other one she claimed on the basis of age, both from Catholic schools. One of them wasn't even Catholic. None of them taught religion full time. Some of them taught like an hour a week or something like that. One of them taught an hour a week. Nevertheless, the judge found them to be ministerial employees because they were hired by the Catholic school and were somehow entrusted, that's the word they're using, to convey the message of the gospel through their, at least their life and their actions. So they're ministerial. So basically what I'm saying is, like, in our current court system, nothing can be done right now, but there are people who are fighting against this. There are people who are, saying, hey, but churches are abusing the ministerial exception, like a Catholic school here in Atlanta who fired a Black teacher because he was advocating for HBCUs, historically Black community colleges and universities. And they fired him. And that's on the basis of race. And the Catholic Church has anti-racist teachings. Like, the church teaches that racism is bad. So if that teacher were to sue, probabilities are that the ministerial exception would. So what I'm saying is, like, yeah, the picture, just pragmatically speaking, looks kind of grim. So unless you can engage in the legal battle, and a lot of people are. A lot of organizations are engaging in that legal battle and figuring out strategies. But at the same time, for the time being, we really are looking at a conversion of hearts, at a theological question. And I'm encouraged by Pope Francis's synodality calls, right? The idea of, like, dialogue, community, let's talk with diverse voices. And you can engage a bishop in a legal battle, but
yeah, and he also he tries to do the pastoral route. It's always about the pastoral approach. Let's shift gears a little bit to the next question. Now, this refers to your excellent answer about creating a space for these kids. How do you protect the high school students who want to forge ahead with a space from the vitriol that they may or will face? Is that a calculus to consider?
My experience with students advocacy, to be really honest with you, is that for the most part, it's the adults that are the problem. For the most part, the students are really ready to create that space to advocate with each other and to support each other. But yeah, some of that vilification can happen from adults, right? Here's where I go back to the importance of LGBTQ plus educators, is because as educators who are queer, we can model to our students, hey, I've received a lot of this hate. I've received a lot of, and here's how I handled it, and where that modeling can happen. But yeah, it's important to protect the students. No, not to protect the students. You can't protect the students. To prepare the students to face that. We had an activity at my school. There was a ficus tree in the library, and the librarian likes to put sticky notes and put a prompt, and students would write on the sticky note and answer the prompt on the ficus tree. It looks really pretty. For National Coming Out Day, we did hey, come out about something. What's something that you usually are ashamed about that you would like to put on a sticky note? And we thought, hey, this might be a way of inviting the community in to really reflect on how difficult it is to come out, right? And some of the students wrote, I'm gay, I'm trans, and some of those sticky notes got defaced. So we had to have a meeting, and I thought, hey, the first meeting is me and the students, no administrators, nothing like that. So I'm here sitting with them, and I'm showing them the defaced sticky notes, and they're passing them around. And I thought, I asked, how do we make sense of this? And it was really cool, because the older students, the seniors, started saying, honestly, this doesn't affect me, or it shouldn't. If it does, this is their problem. This was their insecurity. They had a problem with my existence, that they felt the need to deface my blah, blah, blah. And so the younger students, the frosh and the sophomores, were like, huh, this makes sense. And they were perhaps a little bit more shocked. What? This happens? They're new to the school. They're frosh students, 9th graders at a high school. This can happen. National Coming Out Day is in October. So 3 months in, this is what they face. But then they see the older students. Hey, here's how I handle it. And just seeing that and that dynamic was really great. So again, creating that space where we can train each other to really understand how a person operates, right?
That's a great story. Sort of, kind of examples peer to peer. I want to give you a chance to say something that anything that you feel like we've missed. We have about 5 more minutes, but I just want to share some comments. Sarah Cooper says, Minnesota bishops have created that document. Would love to help change that. I think she's talking about the directives. And then Don Aziz says, be aware of and look for the risks of suicidal ideation and moral injury, which is often simultaneously connected to PTSD and trauma. So good insight. But Ish, before we end, we have about 4 minutes. Is there something that we didn't ask you that you'd like to share or that you think is helpful for people to know?
I have a question, if not.
Oh, if not, Ryan has a question.
Go ahead, Ryan.
So this is somewhat of a personal question, but considering all of the challenges and issues that you have highlighted that LGBTQ students and educators face in Catholic schools, if you had an LGBTQ child, would you still send them to a Catholic school?
One of the pieces of information that we gathered from the research survey we conducted on queer educators, which we didn't publish in this particular article because it didn't really advance the argument, is that location matters. We surveyed teachers from throughout the nation, and we found that location matters. The experiences of acceptance in school. Some of the teachers that said that, hey, I experienced acceptance at my Catholic school, were in particular cities and in particular states, right? So it's hard to answer that question with a blanket statement, but the only thing that I would say is that the Catholic Church is not a monolith. It is not stuck. It moves. Number 2, it is internally diverse. Just like it's hard for me to say Catholic schools, right? And it's not uniform. Not everybody agrees, right? So if you think about it that way, it's really about which Catholic school. And there are some things that you can do. You can look at a website and see if they have a club. You can look at statements and news releases and news reports. And honestly, you can go to their open house and ask the teachers. You can ask administrators, but they're going to give you a political, ask the teachers. Ask the teachers what they're doing. When I was at open house at my schools, the 2 questions that we would get: how Catholic is the school? And number 2, is the school inclusive of LGBTQ plus students? And I got it from the vast majority of parents. How Catholic is the school is because we have a lot of students who are not Catholic. And so they're already scared that their kids are going to become some sort of Bible thumping, conservatives. That's the perception. And I taught in San Francisco. That's the perception that a lot of people in the city have of the Catholic Church, right? But the second one was striking. How is this school welcoming of LGBTQ plus persons? And I say, talk about my efforts. I'm like, do you have an LGBTQ plus child? No, just wondering. Like it's not for their kid. They don't want to send their students to an LGBTQ plus exclusive school. So ask, find the information. Yeah. I think a concluding thought is, I want to go back to one of the first thing that I said is, LGBTQ plus ministry in Catholic schools is risky, but it is also very joyful and very important. I have grown as a Catholic because of those kids. I have learned about resilience because of those kids. And I've learned about myself, my sexual identity, my relationships with others, God, etc., because of those kids. Everyone thinks that their vocation is like the best job in the world. So I will say, like, working with LGBTQ plus youth, to me, has been the best. Well, teaching is the best job in the world, I think. And I think working with LGBTQ plus youth is the best part of teaching. At least it has been in my experience. So keep at it. And honestly, from someone who was a young gay boy in an all-boys school growing up, thank you for engaging in this conversation. It makes a difference. And I had a teacher who was a great space for me. So thank you for being that.
Well, thank you, Ish. That's a wonderful way to conclude with gratitude. I want to thank Dr. Ish Ruiz of the Candler School of Theology of Emory. I want to encourage you to read his article, which he wrote with Jane Bleasdale, which we posted today, which is just excellent, very helpful for anybody who's curious about this topic. I want to thank my colleague Ryan DeCorpo, who is the managing editor of Outreach, who will be coming on full-time May 1st. A couple of things that are coming up. Obviously, keep your eyes open for our next Outspoken webinar in a month. We have two articles that I think will be very interesting to this group. We have an article by Jim McDermott, a Jesuit priest, on transgender kids in schools. And then we're proud of Jim's article as well. We're very proud to have an article by Charlie Bouchard, who's a Dominican priest and who has been advising the bishops on transgender issues, writing about the recent USCCB directive on gender in schools. So some really good things coming up with Outreach. So on behalf of all of us at Outreach, thank you, Dr. Ruiz.
One second. Thank you so much for having me. I was wondering if I could speak about that course that I mentioned.
That's
yes.
right. I forgot. Absolutely. Go ahead. It's a great.
Thank you so much. I wanna just share with you a cool opportunity. There's this group. There's this how do you call it? This department at Candler School of Theology where I teach. That's called the Foundry, and I'm putting its link on the website. Sorry, on how do you call it on our chat. We offer at Candler, we offer degree granting programs to our students, but we also have this department called the Foundry, which is community facing. In other words, it offers courses for people in the community who are not enrolled in a full-time degree granting program. And this is great for ministers, etc. So I am teaching a course through the Foundry. I think the cost is like $39 or something like that. We have scholarships available too if you need. It is a virtual course. It meets 6 times. All 6 times are going to be in May. The dates are May 8th, 9th, and 10th, 15th, 16th, and 17th. So it's a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday of one week, and then Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday of the next week. There is no homework. There are no readings. You just show up as is. You can receive continuing education credit. And the topic of the course is LGBTQ+ dialogue in the Catholic Church. We are going to do a deep dive into Catholic doctrine, into where the state of the questions is. We're going to explore the little nooks and crannies of this conversation, and we're going to talk about its implications for ministry. So if you're interested in something more formal about LGBTQ+ inclusion in the Catholic Church, that's in perhaps a slightly more formal educational setting, consider joining this course. And I'm going to put stuff on social media. You can follow me on Twitter and on Facebook, and you can find information about that class. Again, it's just 6 classes, no homework, and you receive continuing education credit.
Well, thanks, Ish. And also for those of you who are watching this video after it was live, we will be posting it on our social media sites as well, the link on our Twitter and on our Facebook account and on Instagram and stories, so people can sign up. Because as you can see, Ish Ruiz is a wonderful educator. It's a course that I think will be very helpful for everybody. So once again, thank you, Dr. Ish Ruiz. Thank you, Mr. Ryan DeCorpo. And thanks very much for tuning in. Also, thank you very much to Jay Sen, who is our technical advisor who makes all this possible and created and runs our beautiful website. So thank you all. God bless you. Please keep us in your prayers, and good night.